Matthew, the single biggest story about democracy, and the second biggest story is what's happening in Arizona and how we have to sort this out. The biggest, though, is in Brazil. Are we coming down to the climactic conclusion of this? Bolsonaro's put up that the thing was stolen. I guess the federal judge has already come back and said, you don't have the receipts, you don't have it. These rallies in the streets are big. Are the military going to step in here and get to the bottom of what happened in the election? Or are just the truckers and everybody is just going to peter out and Lula just rope-a-doped them and eventually he's going to be installed as an illegitimate president by the CCP and his other handlers in Brazil, sir?
So after Christianity, the most important religion to Brazilians of every stripe is football, soccer. Brazil had their World Cup match, and nobody left the streets. Everybody was still vociferously protesting. This is so much bigger, and you rightly say this is bigger than Bolsonaro. This is, and again, for clarity, Bolsonaro has an alleged fraud. Bolsonaro hasn't come out and said really anything except from after the final tabulation when he gave a press conference 72 hours after. And he said, we're going to follow the Constitution, exercise your right to protest if you believe it is warranted. And he has allowed others, as he should. He is not giving them the rope to hang him with. And the party, and we've discussed this, the party of which he has aligned in his political career, they're a very powerful apparatus led by a guy named Valdemar de Neto. Valdemar de Neto was the one behind this audit of the tabulation, where they said, look, the machines from certain production runs are unauditable and look fishy, but you will not give us the TSE, the subsidiary electoral court to the Supreme Court, who administers and oversees the election, would not participate in the military audit or the demand for audit from the political party. They wouldn't give the machines. They wouldn't give the source code. They wouldn't give the detailed tabulation, drop by drop. In fact, they even took it off the website as forensic auditors, like the guys I've been working with internationally, to analyze. It started analyzing the public data. They took it off for 3 days to scrub it and then put it back on. So the whole society knows that something is rotten here. And what's interesting is if you have all this support for Lula, 50, 51%, 52%, maybe it's 47%, where are his supporters, right? Leftist activists with their hammers and sickles and Marxist flags and big five-pointed stars, they usually are pretty vociferous and are out there marching. There's none of that. There are no counter-protests. There's nobody there. This whole thing has been an information op to set up this ballot dump steal mechanism that they've created with the machines, with the right people in the court that are all Lula, Dilma, and Temer's.
Hold it. Slow down, because they had protesters in Mexico City at Mexico City CPAC when Eduardo Pasovic. They had 1,000 protesters there with hammer and sickle. You brought up something that the dog didn't bark. These guys are the experts in the world, from Antifa to all of them, getting people in the streets. It's crickets on their side. Why is that?
In Brazil, you're not seeing it. You've got the AstroTurf gang in Mexico City. But in New York, we had Brazilian protesters wearing, the yellow, blue, and green, the Brazil flag, going after the judges who were in that event we discussed in New York, which is insane, that they went to talk, the communist judges went to talk about how they saved Brazilian democracy. And you had thousands in Times Square praying, protesting. You have them on 44th Street outside the Harvard Club. And they have to go to Mexico City to find Mexican AstroTurf protesters, and they're holding with Antifa their hammer and sickles and their Soviet flags and pictures of Lula. I mean, it's like, methinks the lady doth protest too much. They're admitting that Lula is a hardcore communist working with global sort of Marxist proletariat of the world unite and march, blah, blah, blah. In Brazil, they're absent. They're not there. There are no counter protests. There's no skirmishes. The military just said, if you're going to protest around the barracks. That's another heads up, another Q, C-U-E, not Q for some of our wackier followers, not the letter Q, but a Q to go in front of the barracks and make that your sort of locus of protesting. The military is going to be taking action. Valdemar de Neto, going back to this key point, unleashed this paper and this petition to the court, which the court immediately turned around and said, you don't have it. Give us the first round as well. Oh, you don't have that within 24 hours? We're fining you 22 million reais, so about $4.5 million bucks. And we're now putting the head of the political party, Valdemar de Neto, on our criminal target list on the fake news investigation, which is the fig leaf investigation they've been putting journalists on. They've been attacking and censoring Bolsonaro-tied congressmen, imprisoning people like journalists. And so Valdemar Neto is now on their fake news criminal investigation snare, and that's crossing a Rubicon. Valdemar Neto, it's not like our party heads that rotate in every 4 years. He is an old guard Brazilian politico who is very well respected, even if you disagree with him. He's been around for generations, and they just attacked one of the senior political leaders. This is not Bolsonaro. This is not a flash in the pan populist politics like they want to paint it. This is an establishment guy who runs the party that Bolsonaro and his people have aligned with the last 2 cycles, and now he's on a criminal investigation target list. That's crossing the Rubicon. The military is giving cues that they're going to take action. There's still time. December 19th is the Lula certification, and in theory, he gets seated right after the new year. That gives a lot of time, and I think the military is moving forward. Now, the court's not taking this lying down. They're using every diktat that they can weaponize, including they're now revoking passports. They just revoked Alan dos Santos' passport. He's the Brazilian journalist who's in exile in the U.S. They revoked his passport, so now he's nationless. And they've also suspended issuing new passports, as if to say, hey, you think you may escape, you're not escaping. And they have no reason doing so.
What are the cues from the military that you think are signaling that they may intervene here, sir?
The big one was last Friday. General Morrow, who's also a vice president, very high-ranking general and politico, he said, and this is a very well-respected guy, that the Constitution is being eviscerated by the court. I'm paraphrasing. But as I said on your show the other day, that's not a unilateral act when a senior general who has high political office says that. That means that there's buy-in across the military. Now, we don't know if it's, they're moving in lockstep. The military is a large organ, but they need all the cover they can to invoke Article 142 in the Brazilian Constitution, which you and I have discussed, which is the clause that says when there's disputes between the separated powers, let's say the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, when there's a total breakdown in society, it is up to the military to restore order. Remember those words, ordem e progresso, order and progress. It's on the Brazilian flag, it's in the Brazilian Constitution, and the faith of the people is in the military to restore order, to get them back on track toward progress. It ain't going to be the Supreme Court, which has no mandate and has totally lost trust from everybody. Even some lefty journalists are saying it's too far. So over the next week, I think we're going to see some bigger and bigger movements out of the military taking action. And I don't know what that actually is going to look like.
Where do people follow you on social media?
At Matthew Tyrmand, MatthewTyrmand, and of course on War Room, Steve.
You've been putting it up daily, so everybody's got to go watch.
And CDM.press. Todd Wood's site, we're going to run out another article and another forensic audit of the electoral results, looking at previous cycles to see how they differ.
When's that going to be? When's that going to come up?
Got the team of auditors who do the Benford's curve analysis over the first 2 rounds. They're working on it right now, hoping to have it up in the next 2 to 3 days.
Okay, fine. Monday or Tuesday. Okay, Matthew, thank you very much. Honored to have you on here.
Jair Bolsonaro is in America to tell Donald Trump that he has a president who not only admires him, but is also a friend of the United States.
It is time to overcome old resistances and explore the very best potential between Brazil and the United States. After all, it is fair to say that today, Brazil does have a president that is not anti-American.
During a 2-hour meeting at the White House Tuesday, which included a luncheon and Rose Garden press conference, the 2 leaders signed agreements and discussed how to work together to end the upheaval in Venezuela. President Trump said Bolsonaro's historic election win marked a new day in Brazil and a new era in friendship with the United States.
I want to congratulate you again on your tremendous election victory. Last October, it was an incredible feat. And really a truly incredible challenge. And the end result was something the whole world was talking about.
By all accounts, Bolsonaro's inauguration as Brazil's 38th president was a significant milestone in the world's 5th largest country. After years of leftist rule, the 63-year-old former paratrooper turned politician is the first conservative president in Brazil's democratic era.
My campaign didn't have a lot of money. Almost all the media in Brazil was against us, so it was a huge miracle that we won.
And now, just 78 days into his presidency, Bolsonaro is already shaking up Brazil's political establishment. Unlike previous administrations that pursued an aggressive anti-American and anti-Israel foreign policy, Bolsonaro is pushing for stronger ties with the United States and Israel, even announcing shortly after winning the presidency that he intends to move his country's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. President Bolsonaro, George Thomas, pleasure to meet you, sir. Welcome to the United States. Following his meeting with President Trump, Bolsonaro sat down for an exclusive interview with CBN News at Blair House, located steps from the White House. Blair House is used for visiting dignitaries and foreign heads of state. You've discussed moving your country's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. When is that going to happen? And why is this important to Brazil?
Each country has the right to decide where its own capital is, and the capital of Israel became Jerusalem. Therefore, we are studying the possibility of making that decision at the right time. When Trump took over, it took him almost 9 months to make that decision, and I am now in my 3rd month.
Bolsonaro is often referred to as the Trump of the tropics. Like President Trump, Bolsonaro believes the mainstream media is fiercely opposed to his presidency and agenda. And Bolsonaro also regularly uses social media to connect directly with his supporters.
To a large extent, I support what Trump does. He wants to make America great, and I also want to make Brazil great. I also have concerns about the indiscriminate entrance of foreigners without any criteria. But beyond this, we are both Christians and are God-fearing men.
Bolsonaro's middle name is Messias, Portuguese for Messiah. He is a Catholic, and his wife, Michelle, is a Protestant evangelical who attends a Baptist church. An assassination attempt by a knife-wielding attacker a month before the election almost cost Bolsonaro his life. He says it is nothing short of a miracle that he's alive today.
Doctors who attended to me said that for every 100 stabbings of the kind I endured, only one person survives. So I am a survivor and owe my life to God. It was His will for me to live.
The attack became a turning point in his campaign as the populist candidate went on to win, promising to tackle Brazil's rampant corruption and violence. 2 months into his presidency, Bolsonaro is shaking Brazil's political world, even standing up to dictators like Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Both Bolsonaro and Trump refused to say whether military plans were on the table to intervene in Venezuela.
I discussed this matter with Trump, and obviously that conversation will remain private. Trump says all possibilities are on the table, and I, in large part, support decisions of the American government.
Presidente do Brasil.
Bolsonaro has surrounded himself with well-known Brazilian evangelicals like Pastor Silas Malafaia, who regularly visits and prays with Bolsonaro. Silas told CBN News that he believes Bolsonaro is God's chosen man to lead Brazil.
Ele não é evangélico.
Even though Bolsonaro is not an evangelical, he always defends the principles that we evangelicals have defended. Namely, he is against abortion. He is against the privilege of the LGBTQ movement. He recognizes the greatness and importance of Israel, defends the family, and wants to fight corruption and restore our economy.
On his first official day as president, Bolsonaro promised to make Judeo-Christian principles a top priority in his administration. Can you talk about the impact that decades of leftist ideology has had on the social and spiritual fabric of Brazil?
The ideology of the left has taken over the universities and also the journalists of Brazil. The impact has been the worst possible. And one of the main goals is to erode family values.
It was this kind of message that drove the majority of Brazil's evangelicals to support Bolsonaro.
The evangelicals of Brazil are equivalent to 1/3 of the population and are growing. I had massive support from them because until recently, they had no one to support who shared their values and faith.
Your motto is Brazil above everything, God above all. What do you mean by that?
I have been a congressman for 28 years, and I saw that in politics, truth almost never existed. And my feeling is that our people are thirsty to know the truth.
His favorite Bible verse is John 8:32. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Why is faith so important to you, Mr. President?
Just like in a marriage between a man and a woman, if you don't have truth, the marriage ends quickly. In politics, if you don't have truth, the government ends quickly.
After our interview, President Bolsonaro met with a group of prominent American evangelical leaders. Among them, the Christian Broadcasting Network's Dr. Pat Robertson and Gordon Robertson, and evangelist Reinhard Bonnke. The American delegation prayed for Bolsonaro and promised to stand with his administration as he fights to protect Brazil's Christian heritage and family values. They also pledged to help Brazil provide humanitarian relief for those suffering in Venezuela. Why is this meeting important to you, Mr. President?
I recognize the work evangelicals do in my country, which is no different to what they do around the world, sharing the Word of God and strengthening family values.
Millions of Brazilians from all over the country took the streets on November 2nd. They want their country back. Around the military barracks in Sao Paulo, in Rio de Janeiro, millions of people chanted, "Federal intervention now." We want a federal intervention because we demand our freedom. Thousands of people also gather in the capital Brasilia chanting civil resistance. They ask for transparency. They also demand the intervention of the army. It's hard to believe that YouTube is doing this. Even our videos about Brazil are being restricted, but Brazilians will not back down. They will not tolerate the globalists and the Chinese intervention. Brazilian President Bolsonaro for the first time asked protesters blocking roads nationwide to lift blockade. He wants everyone has right to come and go, and he wants the best for the economy. But peaceful protests will always be welcome. According to Brazilian police, the number of blockades decreased from 271 on Tuesday to 167 on Wednesday. But truckers, farmers, and everyday people continue to take the streets while people wave flags in front of passing vehicles. Trucks shouted their arms while demonstrating. Lula's Workers' Party announced Tuesday that his vice president would lead the transition process, which will begin on Thursday. His government would definitely implement state control of social media. In November 2021, Lula said, "We will have to regulate social networks, regulate the internet, set a parameter." In 2018, Jair Bolsonaro said, "China isn't buying in Brazil. China is buying Brazil." China has been Brazil's largest trading partner since 2009. Due to China's rapidly rising demand for raw materials and agricultural produce. But Brazil-China relations changed significantly after Bolsonaro took office. Now, if Brazil under Lula, the country could easily fall into China's hand. Thank you so much for watching and see you later.
Moving on now, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said on Thursday that he will not get himself vaccinated in order to attend the UN General Assembly next week. Bolsonaro's statement comes following the announcement by the Assembly's leader of a vaccine mandate for all attendees. During a virtual address, Bolsonaro said that he will attend next week's United Nations conclave in New York, effectively defying city authorities who recently announced that the proof of vaccination requirements were mandatory for all attending leaders.
Então, a semana que vem na Assembleia Geral da ONU, vou fazer o discurso de abertura, um discurso tranquilo, bastante objetivo, focando os pontos que interessam para nós. É um palanque, né? Então, o que acontece? Você toma vacina para quê? Para ter anticorpos, não é isso? A minha taxa de anticorpos está lá em cima.
Earlier this week, New York's mayor office The New York Mayor's office wrote to the UN body laying out guidelines and COVID protocols for the upcoming sessions. This is, however, not the first time that the Brazilian president has criticized the use of vaccines as an effective measure against the virus. Bolsonaro, who had the virus last year, has said that he would be the last Brazilian to get vaccinated. Bolsonaro has faced mounting criticism from global leaders for downplaying the severity of the crisis. The virus has so far claimed more than 589,000 people, and more than 20 million cases have been recorded so far. Beyond World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.
My fellow Americans and friends from all over the world, my name is Paulo Figueiredo. I am a Brazilian journalist and commentator for the second largest news channel on Brazilian TV. I'm sending you this message because many of you have heard that Brazil just held its presidential elections, and I want to clarify some misconceptions. First of all, don't believe in most things you read in the mainstream media. Just like in the United States, the mainstream press in Brazil has been corrupted, and most of them serves as a propaganda machine for the left. And that is what this is all about. The left is trying to retake power in Brazil. You must know this. Lula and his party, the Workers' Party, were in power in Brazil for almost 13 years, from 2003 to 2015, when his successor was removed from office by impeachment for defrauding public accounts. In the meantime, the Workers' Party was being investigated in the largest corruption scandal in the history of the modern world, known as the Operation Car Wash. Several congressmen, ministers, and leaders of the Workers' Party, Lula's party, were arrested and convicted of corruption. The money was being used to finance campaigns, bribe politicians, and to advance the left agenda, and to finance some socialist dictatorships worldwide. By the end, several people confessed their crimes, billions of dollars were returned to the government, and Brazil fell under its worst economic depression ever. Lula himself was convicted of corruption 2 times, and in several instances, by a federal judge, then by a panel of judges in the appeals court unanimously, and again by another panel in the Superior Court of Appeals with an abundance of evidence. Millions of people demonstrated on the street until Lula was arrested and his successor impeached from office. A few years later, Jair Bolsonaro, a low-influence congressman and retired captain in the army, was elected president. He's far from perfect, but the fact is, since then, my country had no significant corruption scandal. We shifted away from China's influence and from supporting Latin American drug states to a stronger friendship with the United States and Israel, for example. Our economy was one of the least affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and for the first time in my life, Brazil is growing more and faster than China and has less inflation than the United States this year. But how is Lula running for president, you might ask? Well, because Brazil's Supreme Court, famous for its political activism, deemed all Lula's trial as invalid and ordered a new trial. But he was already too old under Brazilian law to go under this new trial, so he basically got away with it. One important detail: he was the one who appointed most of the justices that invalidated his trial. Yeah, no kidding. Make no mistake, Lula's election would be disastrous for the United States and most of the free world's interests. Lula just won the first round of our presidential election by a 5% margin, although the polls showed him winning by as much as 18 percentage points. But Brazil's election has 2 rounds, with a runoff election happening on October 30th. Lula has all the establishment on his side: the academia, the artists, the financial market, the electoral courts, and definitely the media. But the battle's far from over. Bolsonaro has shown support that took the country and the world by surprise. He elected a substantial majority in the Senate and in Congress and in several states. The truth is, no one knows what's going to happen, and this is probably the most critical election in the history of Brazil. Please, forward this video to all your friends.
Mas o Brasil não entra nessa. O Brasil é autônomo. O Brasil autônomo não entra nessa. Pode esquecer. Já falei com relações exteriores, tá? Essa proposta, se for para frente, não vai ser com o Brasil. Até porque eu fui o único chefe de Estado do mundo que não aderiu àquelas questões do lockdown, único. Ele falava que tinha que cuidar dos mais idosos e o pessoal com comorbidade. E hoje os estudos de fora do Brasil, em especial, mostram que estava certo. E olha só, qual o estado que vai fechar no Brasil? São Paulo. São Paulo. Qual o estado que morreu mais gente por 100 mil habitantes? São Paulo. Sinal que estava certo.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight, first the good news. The conventional view among people who follow politics is that the Democratic Party is about to suffer a humiliating repudiation in next week's midterm elections. It seems very likely as of now that Democrats will lose both houses of Congress, and that's just the beginning of their pain. Polls suggest that even places that supported Joe Biden by a wide margin in 2020 are about to swing dramatically against him and his party. A week from today, New York, of all places, could have a Republican governor. The last time there was an election in New York, Biden won the state by 23 points. What we're seeing is what political scientists refer to as a realignment. And there's no mystery as to why it's happening. Democrats failed conclusively. No group in American history has done a worse job running this country than the neoliberals currently in charge. They're vicious, they're intolerant, and they are utterly corrupt. But above all, they are incompetent. In less than 2 years, it is not an overstatement to say they have run this country into the ground, wrecking our economy, desecrating our military, and opening the borders of the United States to more than 5 million lawbreakers. The destruction they have wrought is so profound it's hard to describe. So of course there will be consequences for that. In a country with democratic elections, how could this party stay in power? Honestly, we don't know. But maybe Joe Biden does. Tonight, Biden traveled across the city of Washington to Union Station. Built by Teddy Roosevelt more than 100 years ago, Union Station was for generations one of the most beautiful public buildings in this country. Under Joe Biden, it has become a homeless encampment, a place that is too filthy and too dangerous for Starbucks. Standing at this monument to his own failures, Biden proceeded to do what he now so commonly does, bark at the rest of us for our moral failures. The guy who showered with his daughter is telling you you're a bad person. Tonight's topic, democracy. Here's a taste of it. Well, that's very weird if you think about it. So here we are less than a week before the Democratic Party is expected to suffer overwhelming losses in the midterm elections. And here you have the leader of that party, Joe Biden, commanding you not to complain about the election results. Why is that? Well, let's see. Here's Joe Biden telling you that thanks to the changes, the many changes Democrats have made to our system of voting, all of which make voter fraud easier to commit, we may not know the results of the elections for a few days. But don't be alarmed. Everything is completely on the level. And whatever you do, do not ask questions, or else you're a criminal. Watch. What is this? What is going on here? We're a week from the election, 6 days. Biden could have given, would under normal circumstances have given, a speech about his policies and how they've made your life better. He tried to convince you this country is actually in better shape than it looks, and he did that. He could, in other words, have made a pitch for your vote based on what he has done. That's what politicians do in functioning democracies. They try to convince you to support them on the basis of what they have done for you. That is democracy. But that's not at all what Joe Biden just did. Instead, Biden commanded you to accept the election results whenever they arrive, no matter what they may be. It was bizarre, and it did not inspire confidence. You would hate to think that what's happening here is a version of what is happening tonight in Brazil. According to official tallies, a convicted criminal and avowed socialist called Lula da Silva beat the incumbent president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, by a narrow margin this weekend. And yet millions of Brazilians, millions, don't believe that's what actually happened. Bolsonaro himself has not conceded. There are protests all over Brazil right now. You're seeing some of them on your screen right now. There are questions about whether all the ballots have been counted, why so many were thrown out, millions, and whether election laws were violated in the process. So we can't render judgment on those questions, but if you care about democracy, if you think the process is essential, then you would look into those allegations. Anything less is not democracy. And yet what's interesting, and maybe a point of concern for the rest of us here in the US, is that you are no longer allowed to ask questions about this election in Brazil. And you're not allowed because the Biden administration doesn't want you to. That's true. YouTube, which has functioned for the last 2 years as an arm of the Biden administration, has announced it is censoring any posts in Brazil that question the election results. Brazil's courts have also rejected any inquiry into the election. In fact, a Supreme Court judge in Brazil has also ordered social media companies to remove any social media post that questions the outcome. Overwhelming censorship in a, quote, democracy, preventing people from asking questions about how the, quote, democracy functions. So why should you care about this? Brazil, it's a long way away. Well, two reasons. The first is that the result of this election will determine the extent of China's influence in the Western Hemisphere. If Bolsonaro is determined the loser, and de Silva does become the president of Brazil, that means that left-wing governments loyal to China outside of our sphere of influence will control all of South America. Brazil was the last holdout, also the biggest and most significant country in South America. Bolsonaro alone in South America stood in the way of total Chinese hegemony there. It's our hemisphere, it matters. But the second reason you should be paying attention to this is that the crackdown on free speech in the wake of Brazil's contested election is a result of policies from our country. The Biden administration has been interfering in the elections in Brazil, period. The Biden administration has already announced that Bolsonaro lost and then threatened Bolsonaro with consequences if he tries to contest the result of the election in his country. The State Department, the Biden State Department, put out a statement saying that Bolsonaro's defeat, quote, reinforces trust in democratic institutions. Really? This is an election that is contested. The demonstrations in the street prove that has not been audited, that apparently cannot be audited by fiat, and that you're not allowed to talk about. How does that restore your faith in institutions? No, only one thing restores your faith in institutions, and that's transparency. When people are hiding things, it makes you think maybe they have reason to, of course. And when governments hide things, you can be dead certain they're lying, period. But from an American perspective, the question is, why was the Biden administration interfering in a foreign election? These are defenders of democracy who believe in free and fair elections. They shouldn't be meddling in other people's elections, but they are. A lot. Several years ago, Toria Nuland at the State Department, the woman who's driving our war against Russia, was caught on tape admitting that she had engineered a coup in Ukraine. Was she punished for that? No, she was promoted. Again, she's still at the State Department. So it does make you wonder what we've been doing in Brazil. The Biden administration hated the last president in Brazil for political reasons, ideological reasons, reasons that had nothing to do with what was in America's best interest, but had everything to do with the silly lifestyle liberalism that determines their worldview. So last year, our CIA director, William Burns, traveled to Brazil, and while there warned top officials that Bolsonaro could not contest the election results no matter what. Wait a second. Why would the CIA chief be in Brazil lecturing them about their elections? Isn't that interfering in an election? Oh, yes, it is. Then months after that visit from the head of our CIA, Brazil's Supreme Court ordered the indefinite detention of several Bolsonaro supporters without a trial. What did they do wrong? What was their crime? They, quote, attacked Brazil's institutions in their private communications. They undermined confidence in election integrity, so they had to go to prison. It's shocking. And the most shocking part is not simply that there's corruption in a Latin American country. That's par. The shocking part is that the Biden administration is abetting it and reinforcing it and trying to do the same thing here. We saw a preview of this in the United States after January 6th. What's happening in Brazil now is an escalation, and once again, the Biden administration endorses it, has a hand in it. Within hours of a contested election, people have been banned from talking about it. Street violence is breaking out. Naturally, so-called election deniers are being killed. Why would you imagine any other outcome? In the absence of transparency, what fills the void? Conspiracy theories. If you want people to believe the truth, tell them the truth. Stop hiding things. That's not a functioning democracy. In a functioning democracy, you're not simply allowed to raise questions about elections, you're encouraged to. You're encouraged to because it's your government. There's no such thing as election denying in a free society. It's called free speech. You're allowed to say it if you think it, period. And yet our media, which exists to defend free speech, is doing its best day after day to shut it down. How dare you raise any questions about next week's midterms? Why are they telling you that? It's ominous. Here's MSNBC's Ali Velshi making it explicit. Watch as he explains that if you vote for a Republican in Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriano, you're destroying democracy through voting. Watch this. First of all, if people have questions about the last election or January 6th or what happened at Nancy Pelosi's house in San Francisco last Friday, there's a really simple way to put those concerns to rest, to stop the conspiracy theories. And that's produce the evidence. Show us the facts. If people are worried about vote totals in a specific state from 2020, first of all, they have a right to have the party in charge prove that election was fair. But moreover, they have a duty to ask, because the only way you have a free and fair system is if everybody is free to ask questions about it and demand real answers. If you're coming up with some sort of crazy theory about what happened at Nancy Pelosi's house last Friday, instead of yelling at you or calling you names or telling you you're a conspiracy nut, you're Alex Jones, just produce the police body cam. Why is that so hard? If you think something weird was going on January 6th, okay, it's not your fault. Maybe it's the fault of the people who are hiding thousands of hours of video evidence from January 6th. Why haven't they released that? The onus is on them, not the rest of us. We're not the crazy people, you're the liars. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, period. And if that's banned, this is a totalitarian country.
A sua opinião com relação a essa questão da pandemia, isso foi estratégico para derrubar a economia dos países?
Ah, não posso falar isso. Você existe, os países se preparam para a guerra. Tá com bombas, né? Aí tem a guerra nuclear, bacteriológica, o pessoal mexe com vírus do laboratório. Pode ter escapado isso aí.
Essa questão que eles falam...
Não pode ter escapado.
A questão que eles falam muito em ordem mundial, essa questão...
Não, isso existe, lógico.
Existe?
Eu não quero entrar em detalhe aqui. Se não tivesse ninguém gravando aqui, eu falaria mais coisa. Mas quando tá gravando, eu vou evitar falar. Eu não quero dentro da cabeça. Ninguém vai gravar, não tem como, não. Eu não gosto. É o domínio. Você vê países que... A ascendência. Nós aqui temos o que ninguém mais tem. Daqui mais 10 anos, eu acho que a gente vai alimentar 3 bilhões de pessoas. Quase um terço vai ser da população mundial. Nós estamos com 7 bilhões e meio, né? Agora, o interesse de países não é investir, né? E dominando.
Brazil's government-elect of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will revoke decrees made by President Jair Bolsonaro that have eased access to firearms and is considering banning or taxing guns when it takes office in January, a senior Lula aide said on Wednesday. Senator-elect Flavio Dino, who leads Lula's transition team for public safety and justice, said the next government will reverse a series of Bolsonaro's executive orders that have weakened gun restrictions and caused a sharp increase in the number of gun owners in the country. The revocation will occur. Now, regarding what is going to happen with the existing arsenals, today there are two ideas, one that goes in the fastest direction, which is to say that it is illegal and that's it, Dino said. The alternative would be shortening the registration period of firearms to 1 year, to create tougher, more rigorous taxation, which creates an economic burden for the existing arsenals, he added. Under Bolsonaro, Brazilians can register as hunters, marksmen, or collectors, known as CACs, which allows them to own a variety of gun models, including heavy weaponry formerly legal only to the police and military forces.
Compramos vacina para todo mundo. Por parte do governo federal, ninguém foi obrigado a se vacinar. Ninguém foi ameaçado de perder direito ou perder o emprego caso não se vacinasse. Vamos respeitar esse direito de cada um de nós, porque amanhã pode ter uma coisa, que você hoje vacinado não concorde e não vai querer que se obrigue você a fazer essa coisa no dia de amanhã. O Brasil é um país fantástico. Temos tudo aqui que precisamos para sermos uma grande nação. Não podemos começar cada vez mais a tolher direitos nossos. E a nossa liberdade não tem preço.
Estamos aqui para apoiar a liberdade do Brasil, para livrarmos o Brasil de um futuro triste.
Estou aqui hoje porque eu quero a liberdade do meu Brasil. A gente não aceita o comunismo.
Estou aqui, já tenho 4 dias, não vou desistir, tá? O nosso Brasil precisa...
Não estamos com o som de potência. No papel, porque nós estamos todos organizados, não adianta ficarem todos.
Brasil 2023 é outro. Volta a ser feliz.
Bem, estou tomando aqui a terceira dose da hidroxicloroquina. Estou me sentindo muito bem. Estava mais ou menos domingo, mal segunda-feira. Hoje, terça, estou muito melhor do que sábado. Então, com toda certeza, né? Está dando certo. Sabemos que hoje em dia existe outros remédios, né, que podem ajudar a combater o coronavírus. Sabemos que nenhum tem a sua eficácia cientificamente comprovada, mas mais uma pessoa que está dando certo. Então eu confio na hidroxicloroquina. E você? Valeu, tamo junto.
I think people are waking up, especially there's now data from Israel showing the more boosters people get, the sicker they actually get and the higher they're likely to die.
How about in Brazil? Are people resisting? I know Bolsonaro has been putting up front.
Yeah, it depends. If you're pro-Bolsonaro, you're most likely not eager to get the shot. But there are many people who like Lula. And Lula is like saying that Bolsonaro is committing a genocide, but not injecting everybody. So there's a very interesting video I think I posted on my channel, on my Telegram channel. It just shows Lula being totally maniac and saying like Bolsonaro is committing suicide, genocide, sorry, genocide. And he was also saying that forced vaccination should be implemented in Brazil. But I think it's not possible. People here would get crazy, but everybody I know, all Brazilians I know, got the shot. All of them. Really? Because of the media. The media here is crazy. It's pure propaganda. It's not just like in the States or in Europe where media is biased. Here, it's COVID is all over. Whenever you turn on the TV, it's about COVID. Even, I mean, football, like the soccer, you call it soccer, but it's football, you know. Even during football matches, which are holy here, the commentators would just talk about the vaccine, about COVID the whole time. And I was like shocked. I was like, what's going on? And then if you have commercial breaks, it's just COVID propaganda for children, for adults. Get your shot, save your loved ones. So people here everybody was get it just to save the family, because I think there's not really independent media here in Brazil.
Right.
But right now I know people here in Brazil, and literally all of them got adverse effects, and they say they were not going to get the booster, so they're all double vaccinated at least. But they say like they reject the booster because they don't want to be that ill again.
A gente vai se aproximando de quem não deve. Eu já tenho que policiar no tocante a isso daí. São pessoas aqui em Brasília, dos 3 poderes, que não sabem o que é povo. Eu converso com alguns, não sabem o que é um feijão com arroz, não sabem o que é um supermercado, esqueceu. Para ver uns merda para falar aí, né? Uns merda de sempre. O cara rompeu o isolamento, tá dando peça. Até pensei pro cacete, pô, tá passando fome, tá na merda. Sentiu o cheiro de povo. Como é fácil impor uma ditadura no Brasil, como é fácil. O povo tá dentro de casa. Por isso que eu quero, ministro da Justiça e ministro da Defesa, que o povo se arme. Que é a garantia que não vai ter um filho para impor uma ditadura aqui. Que é fácil impor uma ditadura. Facílimo. O prefeito faz um decreto, algema e deixa essa mulher de casa. Se tivesse armado, ia pra rua. Prefeitinho lá no fim do mundo, um jaguapoca do prefeito manda prender. Tem que a justiça se posicionar sobre isso, pô. Tem que se posicionar sobre isso abertamente. Não admitimos prisão por parte de prefeitos no decreto. Tem que falar, não é ficar quieto. E aquele direito aqui, e todos os ministros têm que falar isso aí, não é só a justiça. Todos têm que falar. Por que estão botando algema em cidadão que está trabalhando, ou mulher que está em praça pública, e a justiça não fala nada? Tem que falar, pô. Vai ficar quieto até quando? Ou eu tenho que continuar me expondo? Tem que falar, botar pra fora, esculachar. Não pode botar algema. Decisão do próprio Supremo. E vão ficar quietos até quando? Estão humilhando o nosso povo, porque isso está crescendo. O que esses caras fizeram com o vírus, esse governador de São Paulo, esses do Rio de Janeiro, entre outros, é exatamente isso. Aproveitaram o vírus, está o prefeito lá de Manaus agora, abrindo cobras coletivas. Por causa do vírus, botou esse estuprador para fora. Imagina se tivesse estuprado uma filha nossa, um filho desse posto de liberdade. Nós temos que colocar no lugar dessas pessoas, desse pai que tenha sido estuprado, e os vagabundos foi posto na rua. Com a decisão, foda-se quem seja, tem que jogar pesado em cima disso. Porque isso está crescendo. O pessoal fica apontando para mim, votei em você para você fazer alguma coisa. Votei em você para você tomar decisões, para você brigar. E é verdade. Eu estou me lixando com a reeleição. Por favor, assine essa portaria. Hoje eu quero dar um recado para esses fora. Por que eu estou armando o povo? Porque eu não quero uma ditadura. E não dá para segurar mais. O que os caras querem é a nossa hemorroida, é a nossa liberdade. Isso é uma verdade, é escancarar a questão do armamento aqui. Eu quero todo mundo armado, que povo armado jamais será escravizado. Então, pessoal, por favor, se preocupe, que é mais importante que a vida de cada um de vocês, que é a sua liberdade. Come preso não vale nunca nenhum. Quem não aceitar as minhas bandeiras, família, Deus, Brasil, armamento, liberdade de expressão, livre mercado, quem não aceitar isso está no governo errado. E eu não vou esperar o barco começar a afundar para tirar água. Estou tirando água e vou continuar tirando água de todos os ministérios. No cante é isso. A pessoa tem que entender. Se não quer entender, paciência, pô. E eu tenho o poder e vou interferir em todos os ministérios, sem exceção. E me desculpe, o serviço de informações nosso, todos, são uma vergonha, que eu não sou informado. E não dá para trabalhar assim, fica difícil. Por isso, vou interferir. Ponto final, pô. Não é ameaça, não é uma extrapolação da minha parte, é uma verdade. Dei os ministérios para os senhores. O poder de veto. Mudou agora, tem que mudar. Aqui eu já falei. Pede o ministério a quem for elogiado, pela Folha, pelo Globo, pelo antagonista, tá? Então tem certos blogs que só tem notícia boa de ministro, não sei como. Não é um desabafo, pessoal, é uma realidade. O nosso barco está indo Mas não sabemos ainda, no momento, dado o último caso, o vírus, para onde está nosso barco. Pode estar em direção ao iceberg. A gente vai para o fundo. Tá? Então é isso que eu apelo a vocês, pô. Essa preocupação, acordem para a política e se exponham. Afinal de contas, o governo é um só. E se eu cair, cai todo mundo. Agora, vamos cair um dia? Vamos cair lutando com a bandeira justa, não para uma babaquice de exame antivírus, pô. Pelo amor de Deus, pô. Se eu errar, se achar um dia ligação minha com o empreiteiro, dinheiro na conta na Suíça, porrada, sem problema nenhum. Vai pro impeachment e vai embora. Agora, com frescura, com babaquice, não. Nós estamos bem. Não somos acusados de desvio, de corrupção, nada, tá zero. Temos problema pela frente. Vamos tentar solucionar. O destino do Brasil está na mão desse grupo privilegiado que está aqui. Eu não seria nada sem vocês. E que cada um faça, exerça o teu papel, se exponha. Vocês têm que apanhar junto comigo. Logicamente, quando tiver motivo para apanhar. Ou motivo para bater. Tira a cabeça da toca, porra. Não é só ficar dentro da toca o tempo todo, não. Tô bem, tô cuidando da minha imagem. A minha imagem tá aqui, eu sou bonitinho. E o resto explode. Não, tem que fazer a sua parte. Vamos ter que reagir, pessoal. É outra briga. Tem que ser um governo com altivez. Se expor, mostrar que nós temos o povo do nosso lado. Que nós somos submissos ao povo. Onde o povo está, vamos estar juntos. E ponto final. Não estamos aqui para brincadeira.
Vamos mostrar ao povo quem é o Bolsonaro. Pois mostraram. Bolsonaro é o presidente dos nossos sonhos. É o presidente que todos os brasileiros quiseram e querem.
Não tenho amor por esse mandato, para a cadeia de presidente. Zero. Não vou provocar ninguém. Espero que eles não decidam querer tomar certas medidas, que daí nós vamos ter uma crise política de verdade. E eu não vou meter o rabo no meio das pernas. Zero. Certo? Eu sou o chefe supremo das Forças Armadas. Ponto final. E vou continuar indo em qualquer lugar do Brasil. Ponto final. Problema meu.
It's hard to believe that Brazilian Jair Bolsonaro, the man who draw crowds in the millions, has just lost the election.
Não desampare esse país!
Right after the presidential election ended, thousands of Brazilians were crying and praying for the country. Jair Bolsonaro has taken the lead at first, but the result turned out to be opposite. In the poor districts of Brazil, problems are found and under investigation. And on Sunday, as millions in Brazil went to polls, some reported that Brazil Federal Highway Police making it difficult for people to vote with roadblocks, oppression, and so on. With Bolsonaro stickers on her chest, Rio de Janeiro resident Ana Maria Vieira said she was certain to vote for President Bolsonaro and would never countenance picking Lula. I saw what Lula and his criminal gang did to this country. While Bolsonaro's handling of the economy has been fantastic, but Lula's supporters saying that we can't continue with Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro had only worry about the concern of the rich, at least until the final days of the campaign. Just now, truck convoys are blocking roads all over Brazil to protest the election result. Thousands of truckers from all over the country gave the armed forces 72 hours to go out and take power. Many groups are also asking for military intervention, or else they will start taking over the country. President Bolsonaro has not yet conceded. Right now, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro refused to talk, refused to take calls. He was alone with his son in the presidential palace for hours. His campaign also did not respond to any requests by media, while the media waited outside for hours. And Lula said to his supporters that so far Bolsonaro has not called me to recognize my victory. and I don't know if he will call or if he will recognize my victory. As voting started Sunday in Brazil's presidential runoff election, some political observers feared that Brazil's Supreme Court has censored, fined, and even jailed critics in a move seen as an attempted check on the powers of right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro, his supporters, and the media.
He wants to see isn't going to be easy.
After sitting in prison for 508 days, former President Lula da Silva had just announced that he has regained the Brazilian presidency from Jair Bolsonaro. Thank you so much for watching and see you later.
O governador do Rio, São Paulo, Goiás, tá? Você baixaria decreto pelo passaporte da vacina, ou seja, só pode ir na escola quem está vacinado, só pode ir quem está vacinado, quem não está não vai. Você baixaria decreto nesse ano?
Não, presidente, não baixaria.
Você não precisa falar mais nada. Pessoal, ou nós temos liberdade ou não temos. E a história diz que todo aquele que abre mão de uma parte da sua liberdade por segurança, acaba ficando sem liberdade e sem segurança. Se for aceitando esse passaporte da vacinação, daqui a pouco vem outra exigência, e outra, e mais outra, e mais outra, e vocês sabem onde vai parar isso aí, controle da população. As pessoas que mais me acusavam de ser ditadores, é o que estão fazendo isso agora.
So the same administration that is constantly yammering on about the sanctity of democracy and free and fair elections has in fact been meddling in the elections of other countries, in this case specifically the elections of Brazil, for more than a year. We're not speculating about this. Biden's CIA director personally pressured Jair Bolsonaro's office, that'd be the former president, or still technically the president of Brazil, pressured Bolsonaro to accept the results of the election long before the election took place. Think about that for a minute. You have no obligation to accept the results of an unfair election. In fact, if you believe in democracy, you shouldn't. But no one in Brazil is allowed to complain about it because big tech companies, which have been effectively arms of the Biden administration for 2 years, are censoring anyone who questions the election. So their candidate, Lula da Silva, supposedly won, and you're not allowed to suggest otherwise, period, or air your supposedly guaranteed right to ask about your country. A judge has also ordered that social media companies remove any posts that question the election results. So this is massive suppression, and despite it, or probably because of it, physical protests are breaking out across Brazil. Matt Tierman is an investigative journalist. He joins us to assess what exactly is going on here. Matt, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So the Biden administration is admitting they had the CIA director try to bully the president of a sovereign country on the question of his own elections? How can that happen?
Well, they don't even think it's a big deal. It's par for the course. In fact, Bernie Sanders was talking about it on Pod Save America, the lefty podcast of former Obama administration alum. And it was like, okay, this is great. This is what we should be doing. We need to secure, quote unquote, democracy our way. Now, Bernie Sanders was somebody who was rallying for decades against the CIA involvement in Latin America in the 70s. But everything's about politics for these people. And in addition to the CIA director, now they're talking about sending Jake Sullivan down there, the national security advisor, to make sure the transition is orderly. But the bigger deal, I think, is that they have had a see no evil, hear no evil mentality for the last 2 years as Bolsonaro followers, politicians aligned with him, journalists have been censored, imprisoned. I wrote a piece for CDM Press, Todd Wood, who I know you know, and I listed some of these incarcerated journalists. Even a sitting politician, a sitting congressman, was placed under house arrest, and it's continuing right now. Carla Zambelli, an outspoken member of the lower house, the Chamber of Deputies, has been totally purged from social media by diktat of one man, the head of the Brazilian Supreme Court, who also oversees a subsidiary court, the Brazilian Electoral Court. There's no due process here. It is purely by diktat, and these people are losing their voices, and the Biden administration says nothing. Where is that not considered an irregularity electorally? Where's the Organization of American States, the EU, the State Department, the IRI, who monitors elections? They're silent. It's pretty obscene.
If you don't have free speech, you don't have democracy. Free speech is a prerequisite for democracy. So when you shut down free speech, it's not a democracy by definition. And I wish, if you're not following the Bill of Rights, it's not a democracy. So period. Anyway, Matt Tierman, I appreciate your reporting on this very much.
Buddy, remember, we were watching the Brazil election. Our cyber guys were watching, and they took that we know of was 5.1 million votes. And through the machines. Remember, everybody, over there, as Brandon looks for that, in Brazil, I'm friends with their the president's son, Eduardo Bolsonaro. He's also a friend of the station. His dad is the president there, and they tried to get paper put in where at least the machines would you'd hit a button and it would print out a paper copy so that you could do an audit. That got voted down by the corrupt judges. So the judges over there voted that down. We don't want a paper trail. So they have peer machines, everybody. When I say peer machine, there's no paper. It's just a tap, boom, 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 boom. So whatever that tells you, whatever program's inside, here's who won. Ding, ding.
It's a rigged election in Brazil. This fraud don't shock me, but shock a lot of people that still do not realize what communists are capable to do. When we were following all the numbers and the results and the official website of the Supreme Court, we saw something stopped and kind of being frozen from the 66.66%. And that moment...
Now, you're talking about the total number of ballots counted? Where does that number come from?
Yeah.
Wow, so they stopped it at 66.6. They stopped the counting.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
my
they
gosh.
stopped. That got frozen. And then Lula started to have more votes than Bolsonaro. And not just few votes, 7 million votes. But the problem is, if you see the streets, all the videos, it's viral on the internet, you can see that clearly Lula couldn't bring anyone to the street for the rallies, for anything. And when you see Bolsonaro, even place that Bolsonaro wasn't able to go, was way more packed, and the crowd was bigger.
So it's a lot like what we saw in America. Trump, 20, 30,000 people every rally. Biden, 300 max. We saw virtually the same thing with Bolsonaro and Lula. I have a guest joining me now, Alan dos Santos from Terra Livre, a Brazilian journalist and reporter, talk show host, who got the political persecution and banishment from the very Supreme Court in Brazil that freed the corrupt President Lula from jail so he could run again against Bolsonaro. And now in the first round of the Brazilian elections, Lula did get more votes than Bolsonaro, but did not get the simple majority it takes to win. So there'll be a follow-up election. I believe that date is October 30th. And so I wanted to get Alan on here to discuss. Alan, I'll just open it up to you with my basic questions. And I was asking some friends of mine in Brazil how they felt about the results, and they said the same thing that I was thinking. Was they were stunned. They were shocked that Lula had such success. They couldn't believe it. And these are liberals that don't like Bolsonaro. They voted for Nova and some of the other candidates that barely got any votes. They said, yeah, I voted for these candidates. I knew they wouldn't win, but I couldn't vote for Lula, even though I don't like Bolsonaro. You know, they think he's, right-wing fascist, whatever, but they know Lula's corrupt. So I'm looking at this. I'm seeing some other Brazilian reporters reporting what we saw when Biden won, which was Bolsonaro up, and then these massive ballot dumps come in, 100% for Lula, and then putting him on top. So what is your takeaway from the Brazilian presidential election? Lula getting more votes than Bolsonaro. What do you think happened? Do you trust the results? And what's coming next? Alan Dos Santos.
First of all, thank you for having me here, Owen. It's a pleasure for me being here in InfoWars, and I can assure you it's a rigged election in Brazil. This fraud don't shock me, but shock a lot of people that still do not realize what communists are capable to do. When we were following all the numbers and the results and the official website of the Supreme Court, we saw something stopped and kind of being frozen from the 66.66%. And that moment...
Now, you're talking about the total number of ballots counted? Where does that number come from?
Yeah.
Wow, so they stopped it at 66.6. They stopped the counting.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
my
they
gosh.
stopped. That got frozen. And then Lula started to have more votes than Bolsonaro. And not just few votes, 7 million votes. But the problem is, if you see the streets, all the videos, it's viral on the internet, you can see that clearly Lula couldn't bring anyone to the street for the rallies, for anything. And when you see Bolsonaro, even place that Bolsonaro wasn't able to go, was way more packed, and the crowd was bigger.
So it's a lot like what we saw in America. Trump, 20, 30,000 people every rally. Biden, 300 max. We saw virtually the same thing with Bolsonaro and Lula.
Yeah, the situation is more clear when you see that Twitter is already doing the same in Brazil right now. So Matthew Thurmond from War Room and Project Veritas, he can't post anymore on Twitter. He just got his account, I think, was blocked.
You're talking about Bolsonaro?
No, Matthew Thurmond from the InfoWars, from Project Veritas.
Okay, got you. So they're censoring journalists reporting on this now.
Yeah, in English. My account, of course, it's already blocked in worldwide, and you cannot say fraud anymore. You can't post anything on Instagram, Twitter, anywhere else, and they will just block your account. So a lot of people are afraid to say the truth, saying that we need to work on the second turn right now. The second election, it's going to be in the end of October, and people are now, let us not talk about fraud because we need to get more votes for Bolsonaro, trying to kind of avoid another fraud. But I don't believe that's going to be enough because they are corrupted. They are criminals. It's proven already that Lula da Silva has been proven the most corrupted person in the world, not only in Brazil. And how can you believe that people he nominated to the Supreme Court will count the votes and tell us the truth? And a lot of videos on internet is already showing people trying to hit the green button to confirm their votes, and they can't end their moment on these voting machines. And these voting machines, right? They have been a problem here in America, but everything started in Brazil. This is why Trump retweeted me during the election, because I spoke about these voting machines back then, and it's happening in Brazil, and I don't believe they are not going to fraud again. I do believe they will. They will really make this election rigged as it was on last Sunday.
So obviously there's, about 3 weeks until the second round, which will be Lula versus Bolsonaro on the ticket. You have to get a simple majority, so they bring it to the final two contestants. I mean, what pushback are we seeing, or are you seeing from Brazilian media? Are they being bullied not to talk about fraud as well, with threats of censorship? Are they just fully in the tank for the communist criminals and their representative Lula to be president again? I mean, what is Bolsonaro's option if he doesn't trust the election results? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's a mystery, to be honest with you. Bolsonaro has the army in Brazil. It's also doing the audition, for the election results. So we are waiting to see what the armed force will say about it, because this is kind of last hope. Someone proving, not only mathematically, because mathematically it's already proving. You can see the results. It's not possible to have this kind of pattern, the elections going in such a way, and then everything changed after a frozen time. And Bolsonaro, or he can get way more votes, and even with fraud, he could win, because I don't know if you are familiar with this situation. If you need to have a lot of votes for avoiding this fraud, and way more than you can ever imagine. But I do not believe they're gonna let Bolsonaro win, because Bolsonaro just got the Congress and the Senate. So if they allow Bolsonaro win naturally, I mean, just counting the votes, Bolsonaro would have enough Senate to impeach Alexandre de Moraes, the Supreme Court justice, and he also could pass every bill, every law that he could do in favor of Brazil. For the first time, we never had this kind of Congress that we are going to have next year. So I do not believe they're going to do that. What options Bolsonaro have in a table? Honestly, only the army. The army could speak about what they have seen on election and try to do something, maybe arresting these criminals, because they are. This is my opinion. They should be arrested because they are all criminals. Lula da Silva, Alexandre de Moraes, the Supreme Court justice. If you see on old news, not recently, but if you see some old news when Alexandre de Moraes got nominated to the Supreme Court, you see some accusations that he was a lawyer for a company owned by some criminals, organization called PCC. This organization has been declared terrorist group here in the United States.
This is just amazing. So many similarities between what happened in the U.S. in 2020. Alan Dos Santos on the air with us, breaking down the Brazilian election. We'll be right back. We're back here live on the Alex Jones Show. Owen Schroyer filling in here. Alan Dos Santos with me, a Brazilian reporter, talk show host, journalist. We're covering the Brazilian elections. And, just to kind of reemphasize here, so many similarities between the 2020 U.S. elections and the last election between Bolsonaro and Lula, which is going to be a runoff on October 30th. But, actually, Alan, I mean, Bolsonaro's rallies were probably bigger than Trump's. I mean, if we're being perfectly honest, I mean, Bolsonaro had rallies that looked like 50, 60, hundreds of thousands of people showing up. And as you said, Lula couldn't even have rallies because nobody would show up. And so where are all these voters coming from? Again, I talked to some of my friends in Brazil. Some of them like Bolsonaro. They don't trust the results. The others that don't like Bolsonaro or Lula, that are on the liberal side of the aisle, they were voting for some of the down ticket candidates. But they don't want to question elections, because they don't want to think that might be what's going on. But they're a little skeptical, knowing that Lula is a convicted criminal. And so getting back to where we left off, I mean, Bolsonaro is basically in a position now where, unless he's had some sort of a plan prior to this going down, they're just going to call him a military strongman or a dictator or anything if he tries to deny the results or say that there was fraud, just like they did to Trump, and then they'll go after him with as much charges as they possibly can. I mean, how do you see this playing out?
As I told you before, there is a parallel counting votes that the armed force are doing, because they said if they couldn't have a clear and honest election, that could be a national security affairs. So that was written by the Secretary of Defense in Brazil months before the election. So now we are waiting for these results, and probably or Bolsonaro has everything under control, or we're going to have Lula da Silva reading this election clearly in front of everyone, in front of our nose. I do believe it's dangerous trust that you can redo something after the communists taking power. Like here in America, you have the best laws and regiment, everything. I mean, the structure of the United States is way better than our, for example, constitution and structure, you know? So we do not have as many tools as you have here in the United States. And even United States couldn't redo this rigid election. So I'm afraid to say that I don't believe it's possible to redo these results once you accept the rigid election. And this phenomenon that people are afraid to say it was fraud, that was rigid. It's happening in Brazil right now. I saw this here in the United States with my own eyes. Everyone knew, but a lot of people were afraid to say that truly and honestly, or because they could lose likes and share or money, I don't know. But they were afraid to say the truth. Just few people said that, and InfoWars was one of them. That's what is happening right now in Brazil. A lot of people are afraid to say the obvious because it was a shameless, rigid election. They are not ashamed what they are doing. This is what communism does. They are not afraid to do whatever they want, whatever it takes to take the country back. And there is a plan in South America to unite somehow Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, all these countries together with the drug dealers and Cuba to be a place, a paradise for China. This is very clear for everyone in Brazil. If the person do not see that, it's not seeing the reality. And sometimes they think it's possible to fight against this criminal following the rules. You can't, because they create every new rule in a sense while they are losing the game, you know? You can't trust them at all. How can you trust they will count the votes correctly in the second round if they already rigged the first round? I'm afraid that we cannot redo this situation unless if the army will show up with the parallel results of the election.
Well, and I see there on the screen, I mean, Lula that was probably the biggest event they just had on the screen, a couple thousand people, and it's all people clad in red, and his theme color is red, like the Chinese flag. Totally. But you look at the Bolsonaro rallies, I mean, it's just hundreds of thousands of people, yellow and green, waving their Brazilian flags. I mean, the optics there are incredible. Now, I'm not as familiar with the military situation in Brazil. I've got a bit of an idea, but correct me if I'm wrong here. I mean, Trump had military sabotage. Trump had top military generals and stuff sabotaging him the whole time. It's my understanding the Brazilian military is actually really behind Bolsonaro. I mean, he was a member of the military himself. Is that a correct analogy, that the military is really strongly behind Bolsonaro?
I better say they are really constitutional defenders. They don't take sides politically, but they know what the enemy is and what the enemy is going to do. The situation of the Brazilian army is different than Venezuela, for example, where Chavez kind of bought them all with nominating them to some places they would like to go. But in Brazil is different, and I do believe they're gonna defend the Constitution. The only one problem that I see is how clear is the situation for them. I don't know if they think it's possible to change things, not arresting these criminals. They let a lot of things happen already, but I do not believe this is because they do not want to defend Brazil and they do not want to defend the Constitution. The problem is once you have no, how can I say that? It's hard for me in English, but once you do not understand very well how this enemy operates, you probably can be fooled. And I do believe they can be fooled sometimes because they think they cannot do anything like the military regime where they arrested all these criminals. Some of them, some generals, are afraid of the media. I can tell you for sure, because I've met some of them. They're afraid of the media speaking like, oh, there is a military coup or something like that. I'm not talking here, let me be clear here, I'm not talking about military coup. I'm just saying you can arrest some criminals because you have...
But it's the same fear. It's the same fear of not telling the truth about the results. And it's the same fear. I mean, look, nobody wants to start a war. Nobody wants to become an authoritarian to defeat authoritarianism. Exactly. And so that's the problem. Alan, we'll stay in touch. I appreciate you joining me today. Let's talk again either before or after the next round. If there's any breaking news, where can people follow you and your work?
On Getter, I'm there. Alan Santos, BR, as Brazil. It's double L in my name, and I will be there.
All right, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today and trying to get some truth about the Brazilian elections out there. I don't see much media covering it here, and so I appreciate you coming on. And folks, it's really important. I mean, Bolsonaro is like the best populist, nationalist, pro-human leader on the planet right now. I mean, we got to protect this guy. We got to protect Brazil. They need to be our ally.
The biggest sale of 2022 is now live exclusively at InfoWarsStore.com. The InfoWars Store Super Sale is now live. 40 to 50% off. Bare minimum, 40% off. Many of the products, 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com. And the most exciting of all these incredible products is X3. All three of the very best types of iodine that are natural and pure that actually get into your cells are in X3. The deep earth crystal iodine and two other types to maximize full absorption. This really is the missing link. X3 sold out for a long time, is finally back in stock, available at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139. Now, it takes a few weeks for this high-quality iodine to kick in, but almost everybody after that feels the effects. It's not just for your immune system, but it's for your energy and so much more. X3 back in stock at InfoWarsStore.com, 50% off.
Eduardo, from America, did they steal Brazil like they stole America? The election?
Pretty much the same way. We have a lot of questions. Our party is doing suggesting for the electoral court and a deep investigation because you have a lot of evidences. Unfortunately, they are not doing that. That's why people are still in the streets. Today, we have 18 days that people are on the streets protesting, not only that because they do not want a criminal again in the presidency, but also because the way that the campaign happened in Brazil. And this evidence about the machines is only one thing. You have much other things that the electoral court didn't go in a right way during the campaign.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Brazil.
No creen en las fuentes de la prensa de Brasil, la gran prensa. Tienen todo el abierto en la internet. Busquen por la internet y ahí tomen sus propias conclusiones. Se van a mirar que las cosas no se pasaron bien en Brasil.
God bless you, sir. Eduardo Bolsonaro here in CPAC, Mexico. You heard it from him. Same thing we saw in 2020. Same battle there. They're fighting. They're not stopping.